Hi, welcome to another episode of the HappYness Helix Podcast. I'm Cheenu, I'm a happiness coach, and I look forward to sharing with you some of the things that I have learned from a lot of wonderful people who've done a lot of research, and through the process that I call life, and in terms of working with wonderful people that I'm privileged to have as clients. So, we had an introduction to the HappYness Helix per se, that there are 6 landings going up, and it starts with responsibility and accepting that this is it, that everything that exists in my life, I'm responsible for, which if I imbibe in all my thoughts, my words and my actions, chances are that I will be a person with a great attitude. That's landing number 1. Landing number 2, because I have a great attitude and I take ownership, I will probably be somebody who's liked, who's wanted, and who's supported, has a wide circle of people that I can depend on, turn to, take advice from, take support from. And if all of this happens, that'll get me to landing 4, which is probably the easiest landing for most of us to understand, which is to set and achieve objectives. There are enough and more books that have been written about this landing 4, right? About setting goals, objectives, and achieving them. So we will get into some of that as well during one of these episodes, or maybe multiple episodes, because it is something that we have a lot of information on and we will be touching upon. Landing 5, which is a result of setting and achieving objectives and goals by design consistently, is enhanced confidence, enhanced self-belief, and enhanced ability to look beyond myself. And when I'm in that state, chances are that I will take on objectives, goals that are not just focused on me, but on society, on a larger part of the world of which I am a constituent. So, that's the HappYness Helix going up. I'm not going to be talking about what it is going down, right? That we've done already in episode 1. Today, we're going to be looking at how do I take on what's the first step in terms of this is it, and in having a good attitude in managing my emotional self. Because if I cannot manage my emotional self, chances are that I will be reacting all the time, just like I've touched a hot plate. So, to make things a little easy, we're just going to understand what are the primary neurotransmitters, neurochemicals that play a part, and emotional management. Unless I understand what emotions are, understand what it could do to me, how I deal with them, how I feel them, because emotions are some things that I feel. Feelings and emotions are used interchangeably, but there is a nuanced difference between the two. So first, let's talk about, what it is that makes all of this happen. I've got my laptop here primarily today because I want to be making sure that I read out some passages which are very, very interesting and important that have been stated by experts. So, the brain, which is what we use to process what's going on, is extremely energy hungry, and therefore it's energy efficient. So what it tries to do is to not have to exert energy and thinking. Cognitive resources are kept at a bare minimum. And what does that mean? That means that as much as possible, the brain will try to make everything into a habit so that it doesn't have to think. We did speak about neural networks. The statement that is often made, the neural highways that we talk about, neurons that wire together fire together. So there is less and less energy that is needed for the same set of neurons to fire than it is for a newer set of neurons to fire. Which is why when we have a habit, it becomes a lot more difficult to replace that with another habit, should we find that the habit that exists is not very useful. Multiple books that have been written on this subject, we will touch upon them as well, and the learnings from those books and the learnings from a lot of research that's been done will be touched upon in one of these episodes, where we will talk about how do we replace habits that we think are not useful with those that we think are useful, or how do we create new habits that are useful for us. So, the brain, energy hungry, energy efficient. And therefore it keeps on generalizing, deleting, distorting, and it always makes sure that its primary focus is survival. So it's always looking for threats wherever. I said yesterday that I had read somewhere that 5 out of 6 neural circuits in the brain are for avoidance of pain. And there is only one that is for acceptance of pleasure. Let me demonstrate that with an example, right? So let's assume that this is Cheenu about 250,000 years ago, right? And I'm searching for food. And I'm walking and I see this lovely shiny apple. And I know, because I've had an apple before and I love the taste. So I'm looking at that apple and I'm walking so intent, focused on the apple. Shiny red apple. My water's getting in my mouth. I'm doing that. And I'm walking towards that apple. But out of the corner of my eyes, I see something orange and yellow or black that's got some stripes. But I couldn't care less. I'm so focused on that apple. Unfortunately, that thing, that yellow and black striped thing, the tiger, is looking at me the way I'm looking at the apple. And what happens? I don't get to the apple. The tiger gets to me. And that I don't get to spread my genes because I was an idiot. Because I was so focused on this that I forgot to take care of the surroundings. Not useful. So we have to look at life the way it used to be when we evolved as human beings. Everywhere, everything, there could be a threat. And that led to us developing certain primal emotions, animalistic emotions that we share with almost all animals. I'm not going to get into the theory of evolution and all of that, and I'm not going to ruffle feathers that don't agree with it. I'm going to talk just about the evolution of the human being as much as I know it. And if somebody knows better, kindly share your knowledge with me and or point me in the direction where I can learn something more. Happy to learn. So let's come back to the apple and the tiger. However, when Cheenu was being eaten up by that lion 250,000 years ago, there were other people who saw what happened. And they said, you know what? It's not so very useful to be focused on the goal all the time. We just need to make sure that we're looking constantly everywhere, that we're not in danger, and then we can go there. So the next person who saw the apple didn't look at the apple. They looked this way, they looked this way, they looked everywhere. And one step in front of the other, slowly, all the time, looking around, making sure that there was no danger till they got to the apple. And when they got to the apple also, they looked, is there any danger here? Is there a snake? Is there a spider? Is there something? And that's how our brains developed. So we are constantly on the lookout for threats. Unfortunately today, and I'm going to repeat something that a lot of people have said before, a lot of more learned people have said before. The brain today doesn't differentiate between a real tiger that's chasing me and me imagining a tiger chasing me. It's the same. The brain reacts the same way. So, we have to understand that we have to reduce the amount of energy that we are expending. Why? Energy is scarce. Not today. You have malls and you have a lot of powerful energies packed into small things which aren't very useful probably. But in those days when we were evolving, nutrition was not easy. We had to fight, we had to go and search, forage, we had to hunt, we had to gather. And there wasn't, you weren't going to a supermarket and picking up food. So the brain evolved then to handle those challenges of reduced availability of energy. So it said, we'll need to make sure that we are not expending too much energy. So it tried to conserve as much energy as possible. And the way it does it is by generalizing, distorting, deleting. Anything that can ensure survival, it encodes first. So I'm risk averse, I'm pain averse first. My brain also encodes all the places where we found some really nice things, honey, the berries, the sweet stuff. Let's come back to this, which is emotions. What's that got to do with all of this evolution and risk aversion and all of that? We have to understand that these emotions are actually physiological feelings that we feel. There is a subjective experience. There's a subjective experience. And this is how researchers and scientists now, psychologists, describe emotions as. There is a subjective experience because the same experience experienced by two different people, the same situation, same event could be experienced differently by two different people. Right from the fact that their perspectives could change. Recently, on perspective, I was just watching a small Instagram clip where Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about rainbows. And he says it beautifully, that every rainbow that is seen by every individual is unique to that individual. Because the rainbow forms because of where they are in relation to the rain and to the sun's rays. So if there are 100 people standing shoulder to shoulder, there are 100 different rainbows seen by each of them depending on where they are standing, their perspective. So, the subjective experience is also different for different people, depending on where they are and what their perspective on life is. Basis the subjective experience, there is a physiological response to a stimulus, to an event. And then there is a behavioral response. So scientists, researchers call the combination of all of this an emotion. There is another school of thought which says that emotion is energy in motion. That there is a certain amount of energy that is in the body that is purposed or repurposed depending on the situation, on the stimulus, on what's going on. Regardless, we also give names to emotions because that is where language comes in. For me to share with somebody else an indicator of what I'm feeling, we use words, we give these feelings, physiological sensations and what's going on, a name. And we could call that an emotion. Yesterday we did speak about the emotional styles. That the basis, the foremost layer is an emotional state. It could be a fleeting emotion. When it persists for a period of time, anything from a half hour to a few days could be called a mood. At the state and at the mood level, the underlying physiological structure of the brain is not affected. However, when this continues for a period of time, it becomes a trait where the underlying physiological structure of the brain starts getting affected. So there is a predisposition when there is a certain stimulus for a certain response. This is where the subjective experience comes into play. And all of this, while the brain is plastic, it can be rewired and all of that, emotional styles are the next stage to the trait, where that is the default method or default response to a certain stimulus. And this, for many people, is set in place by age 7. There's a wonderful book called Habits of a Happy Brain by Loretta Browning. I think I've got the name right. If I haven't, apologies. A lovely book. And it's been written in such a way that you don't need to know anything about neuroscience. You don't need to know anything about chemistry or biochemistry. It has been written so well that you can understand what are the drivers, the neurotransmitters, the neurochemicals that create a certain kind of experience for us. Primarily, the book deals with the 4 most important happy chemicals. And they are dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. So what is dopamine? All of us know we've been talking about dopamine addiction and all of that today because social media, it gets the dopamine to run a lot. So what is dopamine, right? What is oxytocin? What is serotonin? And what is endorphin? We'll just talk a little about that. So we're going to talk a little about DOS: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of anticipation of achievement. Many a time it's called the achievement neurotransmitter now. A nuanced way of looking at it is the anticipation of achieving something, the anticipation of getting something. So when we anticipate something, it gives us a certain motivation to go ahead and to perform a few things, which is why once we have something, it doesn't appear as important to us as it was before we had it. Somewhere I read this wonderful statement: we appreciate something that we had when we don't have it. So there is a certain pursuit that we have, and that's dopamine. That's what makes us seek out food. That's what makes us seek out partners and all of that. So dopamine. Oxytocin is about belonging, being cared for, being safe. And that is why when we hug somebody, when we have physical contact, loving physical contact, genuinely loving physical contact, oxytocin is generated. Again, don't know the actual details, but I don't mind practicing it even if it isn't true. They say that to get oxytocin flowing, a hug needs to last for at least 15 seconds, right? So if you're hugging somebody, 15 seconds. A really loving hug, 15 seconds is useful to get the oxytocin going. Oxytocin is about bonding, is about being safe. We have to understand that all of this is evolutionarily very important because we needed safety in numbers. We were not the predators 250,000 years ago, maybe 1 million years ago. We weren't the predators. We were predated upon. So it was very important for us to stick together, safety in numbers. So oxytocin, being part of a group, very important. We will talk about ostracizing and being excluded and why it is the greatest fear that we all have as human beings. Directly related to this, oxytocin is about bonding and safety. Ostracization is the exact opposite. And therefore, if you look at it 500,000 years ago, if I didn't have a group, my chances of survival were very, very bleak. So even today, which is why we crave validation and we want acceptance from people around us. Oxytocin. Serotonin is about status and hierarchy, in the hierarchy. Respect, right? Why? If we look at all of this, we'll come back to all of this. Serotonin is about relative importance in a group hierarchy. All of this because it increases chances of me finding a mate and making a copy of my genes. We have to understand that all mammals' primary focus is to find a mate, make sure that there is a copy of our genes left behind. So that Cheenu who went after the apple without looking at anything else, chances are that those genes don't exist because that's a weak gene. So natural selection supports those genes that are going to survive and thrive and be well. So serotonin, therefore, is about respectability. Even today in the world, respectability is very, very important. We want to be respected, each and every one of us. We take umbrage, we take offense when we are not respected. We'll come back to all of those things. And then the final one is endorphin. Endorphin is actually for pain masking. Again, evolutionarily, very, very useful to have. Why? If, let's say, Cheenu, going after that apple, saw the tiger coming after him and said, "Run for your life," and started running. But then I tripped on a branch, fell down, and let's say I broke my hand. And the pain was so much that I stood there looking at my hand and waiting for somebody to take care of my hand. Hand has nothing to do with running. Even if my leg was broken, I would have still run. Why? The body would have immediately sent out endorphins because they mask pain. All of it is to ensure that this being survives. Only if I survive can I be around, find a mate, and leave a copy of my genes. So, if you look at dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin, all of them are focused on ensuring that I am alive. I thrive. I enhance my prospects of finding a mate, keeping the gene pool alive. We have to understand that. So, when we look at those and we look at the structure of the brain, that the brain doesn't want to expend more energy than it needs to, that it should, it creates habits. One of the most important habits that is relevant today and comes in the way of all relationships is one simple thing. 3 words. I am right. I am right. That's it. That's the biggest problem that we have when it comes to relationships. Because you have 2 people both insisting that they are right. But they're talking diametrically opposite positions. And no wonder there is conflict. Shakespeare said it beautifully. When men run out of words, they reach for their swords. So when 2 people insist that they are right to the extreme, that's when they start beating themselves up. And this can extend to groups, small groups, tribes, and today we are seeing it in nations. Any denomination could be any specific denomination, and you could have violence, both physical and mental and emotional, coming about because of I'm right. And the I am right primarily comes about because the brain doesn't want to expend energy in considering a newer alternative. I've already learned something. I don't want to learn again. Let this be. I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. This also comes into play beautifully. And I have had personal experience with this. 25 years ago, Cheenu used to be a person who was considered extremely, with a very, very short fuse, quick to anger, and not very, how should I say it, not very easy to deal with, right? Wasn't somebody who was soft, because I was so focused on achieving things. So people who knew me 25, 30 years ago, they found me, they experienced me as a person who was hot-headed, quick to anger, extremely fast on many things. And so when I now turn around and say I'm a coach and I'm telling people calm down, don't react, respond, and I tell them what to do, there's a difference. In their mind, the Cheenu that they know is not this one. So they have to make a lot of changes in the way they deal with me, right? So if they have to make changes in the way they deal with me, it means that their brains have to expend energy, come to face the fact. They have to deal with the fact. They have to come to reality and face the fact that Cheenu is this today. But that requires effort from them. So the easiest thing that they can do is to make Cheenu go back to who he was then. This is not just for Cheenu. I am sure that you are doing this to people who are making it an attempt to change and become better. There are people in your life who are going to do this to you. Which is why I say, when somebody wants to change, make a change to their life, become a different person, their biggest obstacles are those closest to them, because they are dealing with you on a day-to-day basis. And they now have to make extra effort to deal with the new you. So instead of that, I'd rather make you go back to who you were. So, I am right is demonstrated in multiple ways. And the root of I am right is based in the simple fact that the brain does not want to expend extra energy. There are times when it wants to expend extra energy and wants to learn things. Novelty. That is where dopamine kicks in. It's the novelty. I'm learning something new. I'm doing something new. And there is a certain reward that I'm getting. If you want to know more about this, there is this wonderful book written by Nirayal, and it's called Hooked, where this simple aspect of wanting differentiated but higher and higher rewards is exploited. I'm using the word exploited intentionally. Exploited by people who now create algorithms on social media, on games, and on everything else. That incremental novelty that keeps us hooked, and what we call today doom scrolling. All of this happens because of the fact that the brain is wired in a certain way. We are programmed by evolution to be in a certain way. So, on emotions, there's this wonderful book called Emotions Revealed by Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman is a wonderful researcher who's been studying facial expressions across cultures. And the book is the summary of all the findings of all the experiments that he conducted across the globe, including on tribes in Papua New Guinea, that the tribe that had had no external contact, and whether they could read facial expressions. And then he came up with a statement. I'm just going to read from that, a passage from that book, which is really, really interesting. And that will play an important part in understanding emotions, understanding ourselves, and how we can then learn to be able to respond rather than react to any stimulus. So, in Emotions Revealed, Paul Ekman says, first, that emotions are reactions to matters that seem to be very important to our welfare. And second, that emotions often begin so quickly that we are not aware of the processes in our mind that set them off. Which is why many a time, like my coach, my friend, philosopher and guide Kichu Krishnan says, sometimes do we wish that our mouth had an eraser. That can we take back the words and erase the words that we have said? Right? We don't even know what the process is that gets our emotions to get triggered. Why we get triggered. For many of us, it's like we've touched something that hot and we react immediately without thinking. I'm going to tell you an event that took place about 3-4 weeks ago for me, where I was thinking a lot about what I was going to do, and then my default programming kicked in. I will talk about that a little later. So, and then Paul Ekman also said that there are 6 primal emotions that are universal. He went to the extent of saying that this could be the same for other animals as well, not just human beings. What are they? Sadness, happiness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. Interestingly, disgust is an olfactory, smell-based emotion. It was there primarily to make sure that we did not eat spoiled food. Which is why when we find something distasteful, our nose goes up like this. Distaste is like, right? We withdraw physically and our face goes in a certain way that it's a smell-based emotion. Something interesting was found when Paul Ekman did this experiment. That even people who were born blind, so they have never seen another person emote or show their emotions, the same expressions were there for these blind people for anger, happiness, sadness, surprise, and disgust. Right? So they've never seen anybody, they've not seen somebody express themselves. People are born blind. The other thing that people are born blind also did when they achieved something was this. This is a universal expression of feeling good. So I will talk a little about that in maybe one episode, but this I'm going to leave here. That if you want to feel good about yourself and you want to pump yourself up for feeling good, you're going in for an important meeting or you're going to have something where you need to be your best, just take half a minute and do this, right? And chances are that you'll actually feel a little better. So, again, Alan Watkins, who's written a book called Coherence, says that energy in motion is what is emotion. And he speaks about 3 neural networks that are predominant in controlling what happens. First is the neural network in the brain. We are all aware of that. Apparently, the gut has its own neural network. So our languaging also tells us all of this. I felt it in the gut. I've got a gut feel. It's not just a play of words. It's actually an experience. We actually feel some things in our gut. Butterflies in the stomach. There is a reason, because there's the vagus nerve that connects from the stomach to the brain and a whole lot of things. We'll talk a lot about that later. There is probably an expert on this, on the gut microbiome, whom I'm privileged to have as a client, whom I will probably invite onto one of these episodes for her to share her knowledge in terms of how to create a good microbiome in the gut, which directly impacts what goes on here in terms of the brain, how the brain functions, how we manage our emotions. All of it is controlled by the gut as well. So, neural network in the brain, neural network in the stomach, gut, not the stomach, the gut, actually the gut. And the most powerful of them all in the heart. So, Alan Watkins' book, Coherence, is all about how the neural network of the heart controls how we manage our emotions. The acronym that Alan Watkins speaks about in the book is BREATHE. B-R-E-A-T-H-E. Breathe rhythmically, evenly, and through the heart every day. That's what BREATHE stands for. So when I first came across this, when I was reading this book, I said, how does one breathe through the heart? I breathe through my lungs. I realized that there is a coherence that is required between the heart and the lung, because the lungs provide that one most important thing that the heart pumps, which is oxygenated blood. So the lungs and the heart are working in tandem. And when we can keep our breathing, which is done entirely by the lungs, and the heart which pumps out the blood, when we can keep the coherence, chances are that we will be able to manage our emotions better. We will be able to take control of what goes on. From time immemorial, we've been told that breathing is key. You have various schools of thought on breathing. There is a wonderful book called Breath, written by James Nestor, which you can access, which talks a lot about this. In India, there is enough and more work that has been done on this wonderful aspect of breathing. So I'm not going to be taking too much time today on talking about it, but I'm going to say that yes, breathing, the heart, the brain, and the gut, they're all interlinked. And we can handle our emotions through handling all of these. Any one of them is useful. Handling all four of them is great. So, how does this help us? What are the primal emotions that you and I, on a day-to-day basis, we experience? First and foremost, anger. Second, fear. Third, probably a certain amount of distaste. Right? Grief, sadness, not so very common, I would hope so. But anger, fear, distaste, we have enough and more opportunities to feel this on a day-to-day basis, multiple times in a day. So let's understand what anger is, what fear is. Because if we don't understand what is anger, what is fear, there is no way in which we're going to be able to handle anger and fear. Let's do an experiment right now, right? Let's assume that I'm talking to you and we are having an interactive exchange on this. So this exchange that I'm talking about is, let's presume that I'm asking you a question, right? And the question I'm asking you is, what did you have for breakfast today? Let's assume that you told me that you had, let's say, eggs and toast. Or if you were in the south of India, idli and vada or something like that. I'll say, great. Then I'll ask you the second question, which is, when did you have that breakfast? And you might say 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And then I look at my watch and say, it's now 3 in the afternoon, and you had breakfast at 8 in the morning. When I asked you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that you had, what did you have for breakfast? Where did you get that information from that you had whatever you had for breakfast? This is something that we ask in one of our workshops called the communication workshop. And this is to establish a very important aspect of how we live life. After a lot of going back and forth, both of us will agree that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you were able to access your memory, data bank of memories, and say that at 8 o'clock this morning, I had idli and vada or eggs and toast or whatever it is. Then I'll ask you another question. If you could have anything for lunch tomorrow, anything at all, what would you like to have for lunch? And you'll give me some answer. Each and every one of you who's watching will have thought about this. And you would have said whatever it is that you wanted to have for lunch tomorrow. I'll ask the second question. Now, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where did you get that information from that you're going to have whatever it is that you wanted for lunch tomorrow? Again, you'll come back and you'll say, from my memories. Because when I asked about the breakfast, that was about the past. You went to your database of memories and you looked for that one record which said breakfast on which date. And you looked at what was there. And you said, this is what I had for breakfast. But when I ask you for what would you like to have for lunch tomorrow, You'll go to the same database of memories, but you'll start applying filters. The first filter is all the dislikes are taken away. So each and every item that you've ever eaten in your life has one flag, like, dislike. So all the dislikes are filtered out. So you lifted all the likes. And then you start applying multiple filters. And all of this happens like that. And how does that work? What do I want? What have I been missing? How am I feeling in my body? What do I think I should be eating? What are my goals? Yet I need to have a good lunch tomorrow. I know that I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be cycling the next day. I'm going to be doing all of this. You'll factor all of these things in, and then you'll come up with one record and say, this is what I'd like to have for lunch tomorrow. Because that's the way we are. Remember that apple? We do not want surprises unless they are surprises that we are sure will make us happy. We don't like nasty surprises. So I was asked this question by my friend Kichu about 20 plus years ago. I did the same thing. I didn't tell him, I'd like to eat something tomorrow for lunch that I've never eaten before and is going to be the best thing that I've ever eaten in my life. I never said that. I've asked this question to thousands of people. Not one of them has said this. Right? Why? Because we are risk averse. I'd rather have a known devil than an unknown angel. Same thing applies to food as well. So, when I ask about the past, we go to the past. When I ask about the future, we go to the past and we say, we'd like something that is really nice from the past, experienced again in the future. So, what does that mean? So, as a happiness coach, I'm asked, even today, this morning, I had somebody ask me, how will you make me happy? I once had a very interesting person who asked me, very senior, retired member of the Indian Armed Forces. I met them at an event, and a friend of mine introduced me to them as, this is Cheenu, he's a happiness coach. So the person looked at me and he said, so how will you make me happy? Will you tickle me? So I said, no, sir, I've forgotten my red nose. I'll probably wear my red nose and have my colored hair and I'll do some clowning around. So I said it without any sarcasm. I genuinely said it. The person said, you know what, that was probably not very appropriate for me to say this. And if this person is saying that you're doing something, I should give you that respect. I'm sorry. So I said, no apologies needed. However, as a happiness coach, how do I support people? I said it in the first episode. I support people in helping them make appropriate choices that give them the greatest potential probability of the future they think now they would like to have in future. So, if happiness is all about the choices that I make, with this experiment of breakfast today and lunch tomorrow, we've established that we are going to be risk averse. That this is another question that I ask people. This is a question that I picked up from this movie called The Arrival, which is about visitors from somewhere, aliens. And the wonderful question in that is, if you could see your life from start to finish, from beginning to end, would you change anything? Ponder over that question. If you could see your life from beginning to end, would you change anything? I'll let you ponder over that for maybe 5 seconds. Now I'll tell you what has been the response that I've got from a majority of people. Majority of people have said, no, I wouldn't change anything. Small minority of people have said, yes, I would like to change some of the things in the past that hasn't been very nice, some mistakes that I have made. I'd like to change them. But then I tell them, if you want to change something about your life, then your life will be one never-ending simulation exercise. Because when you change something in the past, who you are right now would also change. And it'll lead to a certain different set of things that might have happened. So, better is to say that, this is it. Brings us back to this is it. This is it. Responsibility, ownership, accountability. And that probably is freedom. And that probably is happiness. So, breakfast, lunch, we've realized that we are all acting from the past. Memories. What we've stored as memories is what defines what we want for the future. So, when I ask people, what would you like to have in future? If you had 2 buckets where you could put all of your experience that you've had in your life so far, like or don't like. And you have 2 buckets. Every single one of your experiences you have to put in one of these buckets. And then I ask you this question, what would you like for the future? And you might say, most people say, I'd like to have all experiences that I have in the future that will go only into the like bucket. I want everything in my life to be an experience that goes entirely and fully into the like bucket. So when they say this, I say, wow, well, let's check that out. Then I ask them a question. Tell me, and I'm a foodie, incidentally. I ask them a question. Tell me what is the most ideal, what's the greatest, most tasty food that you prefer? It could be something that a person makes. It could be your mother, your grandmother, or somebody. Or it could be a certain dish at a certain restaurant that you absolutely love. It could be anything. Incidentally, I'm a foodie, so we'll probably do a lot more on that as well. Maybe how the gut microbiome, food that we eat, how can it be healthy, and how it can be also something that we can eat outside, etc., etc., etc. We will probably do that in one episode. So, they give me some answer. I've had answers ranging from cheesecake to chicken biryani to curd rice to burger to pizza, a specific pizza. And I say, great. When I ask the question, what is that one food that you absolutely don't like eating? I've had answers from various things. So I say, are you sure that the first item that you mentioned is the food that you absolutely love, that you'd eat it anytime? And they say, yes. And I ask them next, the second food item that you do not like, it's something that you'll never eat. Absolutely, I won't eat it. They don't realize that I'm setting them up. Because then I tell them the most wonderful thing. I say, from the next meal onwards, any meal that you eat, wherever you eat, whenever you eat, wherever you eat, you'll get that beautiful, that most important, most appreciated dish. And that's the only thing you'll get. If it's cheesecake, you'll get cheesecake for breakfast, lunch and dinner and a snack and anything. If it's chicken biryani, you'll get chicken biryani for breakfast, lunch, dinner and a snack. If it's curd rice, you'll get curd rice for whatever. And I ask them, how long before you say, please give me something else but not this? And the answers have ranged from 2 days to 2 weeks. I say, are you sure? And they say, yes. In 2 days' time, I'll be sick and tired of the same thing. Even though it's the greatest that I'd like, I'd want something else. Ask them the next question. How long before you say, even that food that they said that they will never eat, but not this one which I really love? How long for that to happen? And they look at me like they say, it will happen. If I give you your most favorite food only for an extended period of time, you'll come to a stage where you'll say, even that food that I absolutely don't like, but not this one. You will get there. It might take months, but you'll get there. And they say, yes, it will happen for me. So then I asked them, when I asked you about life and what you wanted your future to be full of, you said you wanted all the like experiences. And we've just established beyond doubt now with you that like itself is not permanent, that it keeps changing, that if you get too much of it, you don't like it. The same thing, I'm going to read out another passage from a wonderful book called Some by David Eagleman. Tales from the Afterlives is the tagline for the book. If you haven't read that book, it's an amazing book. I suggest that you read it. And in that, Eagleman says, it's about how in the afterlife, we relive our lives, but with the events changed. That all events that share a certain characteristic are grouped together. So one of the things that I remember is 27 days clipping nails. Because clipping nails, all the clipping of nails that you've done in life are grouped together. So for 27 days, you'll be clipping your nails. Or you'll be taking a 8-month bath because you can't take a bath otherwise. So on and so forth. And he says that, 13 days or some such thing, driving the street in front of your home. And 27 hours of intense pain, all broken bones, everything all together. So on and so forth. So you get the drift. That when it's all put together, it becomes a little too much to handle. So the end of the chapter is with this 4 minutes wondering what your life would be like if you reshuffle the order of events. In this part of the afterlife, you imagine something analogous to your earthly life. And the thought is blissful. A life where episodes are split into tiny swallowable pieces, where moments do not endure, where one experiences the joy of jumping from one event to the next like a child hopping from spot to spot on the burning sand. So, if we have to be happy, we need to be able to understand that we need to manage our emotions. Anger, fear, right? Anger and fear come out of expectations. Expectation is in the middle. Anger is always about the past. Fear is always about the future. Anger is about something that I wanted that I did not get in the past. Or getting something that I did not want in the past. Or losing something that I had in the past. All of these 3 primary things that I can think of that lead a person to have anger. We can never be angry about the future. We can do advanced booking. Yes, we do a lot of it because we start playing it in our head as to how people might react and all of those things. And so when we go into a meeting, we go in primed for anger. That's not what I'm talking about. So future, when I focus on the future, again, I'm afraid. Fear is of the future. What are they? 3 things. Losing what I have. Not getting what I want. Or getting what I don't want. So if you look at it, anger and fear, flip sides, 2 sides of the same coin. What's in the middle? Expectation. What drives my expectation? My expectations are driven by my past experiences. What I believe is what I'm entitled to. What I believe is fair. What I believe is something that is due to me. And that can change from person to person. However, we would be better served to understand that if I have anger, it's always about the past. If I have fear, it's always about the future. Let's take a look at anger. I expect something. I wanted to have something, or I've lost something that I held dear to me. That's where I'm angry. I'm also angry sometimes in person-to-person communication when I communicate and the other person hasn't understood. Why do I get angry that the other person has not understood? Because they haven't got it. I expect that they should get it. Why am I angry? Let's peel that onion a little. I'm angry because I don't want to expend energy in explaining this to them. My friend Kichu was addressing some school teachers, and he had given a talk. And at the end of the talk, some of the teachers came up to him and said, "Kichu, that was great. Tell us, how do we handle slow learners?" And Kichu looked at the teacher who asked that question and said, "Beg your pardon?" And the person said, "How do we handle slow learners?" And Kichu again said, "Beg your pardon?" Immediately another teacher there said, "Not everybody learns. There are some slow learners." And Kichu looks at that second person and says, "Hold on, let that person ask me the question." So the third time the same teacher says, "Kichu, there are slow learners. They don't get it. How do we handle them?" So Kichu can say these things and get away with it. Hopefully when you see him on one of these episodes, you'll understand what I'm saying. He looked at the teacher and said, "In all my life, I've never come across a slow learner, but I've come across many slow teachers." Right? So when we look at it, anger, if I'm speaking to somebody and they don't get it, this is it. Responsibility means I have to say it this way. I have not made it easy for that person to understand. I have not made it easy for them to understand what I'm saying. But that's difficult. It's easy for me to blame them. So I say, "You are not listening to me. You are not understanding." Parents with children, in the workplace, everywhere. Right? There is a wonderful anecdote that is attributed to Sun Tzu and the art of war. Not relevant at this point in time. Probably in another episode we will come back to it. Or if you know what I'm referring to, you could send that to me and say, "This is probably what you're talking about in terms of communication in Sun Tzu." So if I'm acting responsibly, my statement would be, I have not made it clear to you. I have not made you understand. But then that requires me to expend energy. And I don't like expending energy. Why? Brain, energy efficient, and therefore energy hungry, and therefore energy efficient, and therefore very, very miserly in terms of expending energy. So it wants everything to happen immediately. So anger is about the past, about not getting what one wants, or getting what one does not want, or losing what one has. Fear is about the future, losing what one has, not getting what one wants, or getting what one does not want. So without expectations, it would be impossible to have anger or fear. Nisargadatta Maharaj said it beautifully. I'm going to read it out. And he said, "Fear is only possible for somebody who has already suffered pain and does not want it in the future." So the person listening to him asked, what about fear of the unknown? Because that is the greatest cause of stress for all of us. What if? And to that question, Nisargadatta Maharaj said, "Who has not suffered is not afraid." So if we have not suffered something, chances are that we will not be afraid. But the beauty of language is the one thing that makes human beings the predominant species on the planet. Why? Every other being is born ready to survive. human beings, like the kangaroo Joey, spend 9 months in the mother's womb. And then it takes them 2 years of care and attention and mollycoddling and all of those things for them to become capable of taking care of themselves. So 2 years. But in all of this, there's one very important thing that we humans have, which is being used right now in me communicating all of this to you. Language. Language makes it possible for somebody to learn lessons without having to go through the experience themselves. Language makes it possible for history. So we don't have to go and make the same mistakes again. So, fear of the unknown and fear that we get comes up because we've been told a few things. So the environment in which we grew up, the family circumstances, societal circumstances, cultural circumstances, geographic environment, all of it plays a part in terms of how my experience of life is, and therefore what my expectations are. So therefore, this is the HappYness Helix Podcast. What is happiness? It's a question that I've asked a few people. Is it pleasure? Is it bliss? What is it? How would you define happiness? A while ago, I started an ambitious project, which hopefully I will complete, which is to write a book. Right? And in that, one of the things that I wanted to touch upon is definition of happiness. So I'm going to read out the definition of happiness that I did come up with. So again, I don't want to make a mistake, so I'm going to read out from here. For the purposes of this book, the term happiness could be taken to mean the state of resourceful, mindful awareness that enables one to be equanimous and function at their best in any circumstance, and not dependent on the achievement of any particular end result. That's too technical or too much to wrap your head around. It could simply be the experience of being in control of one's life, of a life with well-being, joy, contentment, fulfillment, and equanimity, combined with the thought that one's life is purposeful, meaningful, worthwhile, or just good. I think probably the statement, life is good, encapsulates all of happiness. But the key question to consider whether life is really good. This is where one of the statements that a lot of people whom I worked with, a lot of people that I've had interactions with, have heard me state this. I borrowed this from Professor Richard Boyatzis. I was lucky enough to participate in one of his seminars. And in that he made a wonderful statement. And he said, self-assessment isn't just illusional, it is delusional. So the experience of being blissful, etc., is very personal. And at the same time, it is very useful for us to take some external triangulation, inputs from people as to whether we are aligned with what we are feeling and what we are projecting ourselves as. Is that congruent? Is that aligned? So, the first step in accepting this is it, and the first step in terms of being aware of our emotions. Because if I have to have a great attitude, which is the first step or towards the first landing of having a great attitude, is being in control of my emotional responses, my emotional self. Regardless of the stimulus, regardless of the environment, I need to be in control of my emotions. Because most of us, I have done that enough number of times in my past, where I've said something in an emotional state that I wished I hadn't said. I've done something in an emotional state that I wish I hadn't done. I have lost friendships. I have a very good friend who hasn't spoken to me for 25 plus years, because at that moment I was very emotional and I thought I was functioning from I was right. What is the price I had to pay? A friend who hasn't spoken to me for 25 plus years. Right? So if I was a little better in control of my emotions, I would have probably had a different thing. Again, I'm not trying to change my life. I'm only looking at the rearview mirror and saying, this is a lesson that I need to learn. And therefore, I need to look at the future through the learning from the rearview mirror so that I am in better control of my emotions. So, there is a quote that is often misattributed to Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is the most amazing human being that I've had the benefit of learning from, that I've never met. All his books I've read multiple times. Incidentally, one of the things that I will talk about in one of the episodes is scheduling a crying session. Tears, crying, very useful. I schedule a crying session once every 7 to 10 days. And I cry physically. Most people don't see me crying. I do that in private. But it's very, very beneficial to me. So a couple of things that I need triggers to get me to cry. Right? So one of those triggers is this wonderful book called The Stone for Danny Fisher by Harold Robbins. If I read the first 3-4 pages and the last 3-4 pages, guaranteed I'll cry. Similarly, there are certain portions of Viktor Frankl's book, The Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning, if I read, I will cry. So there's a quote that is misattributed to Viktor Frankl, right? Actually stated by another wonderful person, a psychologist from America called Rollo May. And I'm going to read that out so that we understand that this is important. And if you can understand this in your life and you can start implementing what I'm going to read, or at least become open to accepting that I'm willing to do this, then what we talk about in our future episodes might be useful for you. So what's that? This is from a book called The Courage to Create by Rollo May. Human freedom involves our capacity to pause between the stimulus and response, and in that pause, to choose the one response toward which we wish to throw our weight. The capacity to create ourselves, based on this freedom, is inseparable from consciousness or self-awareness. Let's just take a look at another thing that I'd like to talk about, and I've demonstrated this to all my clients when I talk to them. I become aware of something. And then, the moment I become aware of it, either through my own actions or introspection, reflection, or if somebody gives me feedback, tells me that this is where I could have been better. So the event happens. And for me, because I'm sitting facing you, my past is here, my past is here, and my future is here. So the event happens, and I become aware that a certain event has taken place a certain time after the event. The next time it happens, hopefully it'll be a shorter time after the event. And so on and so forth, that more and more it will come closer and closer to the event itself. Till one day I will be aware of it the moment the event has taken place, or my behavior has been a certain way which I don't want it to be that way. I've said something that I don't like saying, or I shouldn't have said. So I'm aware of it immediately as it happens. Then the most beautiful thing happens. I'm aware of it when it happens. As it's happening, I become aware of it. Then I become aware of it just before it happens. I still can't do anything about changing my behavior. But then the most beautiful thing happens, which is there is a gap that is created between my awareness and the event. This gap is what Rollo May talks about. Stimulus and my response. So in this gap, in this moment, this gap that I have a choice. I have a choice of responding rather than reacting. Making good use of this choice, this space that I have, choosing wisely, requires a lot of practice, a lot of awareness, a lot of learning. And all the learning, all the thinking sometimes comes to naught. You remember I said something that happened 3 to 4 weeks ago? I am going to give you that incident. So I'm driving in Bangalore to the station to pick my mother and my wife from the station. It's late evening and I'm going to pick them up. And I'm driving and there is this one road. Those of you who know Bangalore, KR Road. And I'm driving on KR Road. And there is this other car that's trying to do all kinds of gymnastics. It's a 2-lane road on one side, but really not 2 lanes. And this person seems to be in a hurry and is going, I can see in the rear mirror, the person's going this way, and they're trying and they're honking, and all of that is happening. And I'm like looking in the rear mirror and saying, I don't even have space to move away and give this person place to go away. But as luck would have it, I come to a certain place where there is a traffic light. I stop at the traffic light and there is this counter that's going. It says 45 seconds to go. And I stop the car. And this car comes and stops next to me. So I look at the driver and the person is animated in conversation with the co-passenger. By the time I looked up, it was 42 seconds to go. And then I looked and I said, there's a part of me which was like, what the fill in the blanks is this person's problem? And then I caught myself because I'm aware that it's happening. And I said, okay, what would I say to somebody who gave me this as an example of something that irritates them? I'd say, you know what? We don't know what's going on in their life. We don't know why they're in a hurry. We don't know whether they're even aware or not aware. It really doesn't matter. Right? And I would also say something that a person that I've learned a lot from, my father's very good friend, he would say it in Tamil. I'll probably say it in Tamil and then explain it to people who don't understand it. He would say, Srinivasan, that's what he would call me. He says, Srinivasan, nari valam pona enna, vedam pona enna, mela vizhundu pudunga vandha seri. Basically, he would say, let the fox go left, let the fox go right. Let it not jump on you and do something to you. Let it be. Basically telling me that don't get involved, don't go and do something. And he specifically would tell me, especially when it came to driving. So I was looking at that person and said, I really don't want to do something. Let that person go. I have time. So I put the car in neutral. And I said, here I'm at a traffic light. The road narrows. There is not going to be enough space for that person to go if I also go. So I will wait. And let them go. So this is the gap that I'm talking about. For me, it was 42 seconds of a gap. 42 seconds of cold, clear thinking. And saying, I'm going to let that person go. And the counter comes down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that person tries to jump. And my immediate response is, boom! I go right in front. I do not let that person go. I go down the road and I start laughing. I'm really laughing. I'm driving and I'm laughing. And it's a very narrow road. And about 200 meters later, it opens up into a circle. I go, park the car there, and I laugh, and I laugh, and I laugh. So I was telling you about awareness, stimulus, and response. How is this event relevant? Recently, I'm a motorcyclist as well. And after a long time, I did a solo ride. I was doing about a 250 kilometer ride one way. And I was doing it solo. A week prior to that, I had gone on a ride with a very dear friend of mine who is responsible for, in many ways, for this podcast as well, right? And at one point, we were riding to Goa. At one point in time, he looked at me and he said, Cheenu, I'd like you to be aware, you have right of way, you are doing what the right thing is, but you're on 2 wheels and you do not want to tangle with those on 4 wheels. Let them be wrong, let them go ahead, you just move out of the way. So I remembered the place where this happened for me, where I was thinking about it for 45 seconds and then I jumped and I stopped and I laughed. This place is called Garadi Apartments. The signal is called Garadi Apartments. So when I was going on the ride, I got onto the bike and I said, I'm going to ride safely. I'm not going to let any of these things come in the way. If somebody wants to go, I'm going to let them go. I'm alone. I need to be safe. I'm riding because I love riding. I don't want to do something where I think I'm right and get into trouble. So through the ride, I just kept telling myself, Garadi Apartments, Garadi Apartments, Garadi Apartments. Whenever I had traffic on any direction, I just told myself, Garadi Apartments, let it be. Let the fox go left or right. Let it not jump on you. You stay safe. So the first step in having a great attitude is creating this pause and training and learning how to make it a habit to have even the smallest of gaps between stimulus and response, and having the wherewithal, the awareness, the consciousness, and the willingness to choose a response that is useful for me and for my happiness. With that, we will wrap this episode up. Hopefully it's been useful. If you like it, kindly share this with people who you think will benefit. And I look forward to having another episode with you, sharing a little of what I've come across in life. As always, keep smiling, stay happy. Happiness is a choice. Bye-bye.